a second to share my screen. Oh, 1 second. Cool, awesome. So we've heard from Kevin on content marketing and how to use content to get more users to come to your brand website. And then we've heard from Ethan on how to optimize the SEO to get even more users to find you. But as you know, actually apps do a really good job at actually converting and retaining your users much better than your website. So once you've acquired users through organic strategies to your website, how can you actually take them from your website inside your app? So one of the things that you can do is this idea of leveraging web to app conversions. So actually showing banners on different pages where you're actually getting users through content marketing or SEO, and use those banners to convert your web users into app users, where they're more likely to actually convert and retain. So, some interesting things you can do with these banners. I think the really key around these is the idea of personalizing them and not showing everyone the same banner. Google penalizes you, especially if coming from search, if you show someone one of those big banners like the StubHub one or the AP News or even the Rent the Runway here. So the only ones you should show if someone is coming from an organic search, it should be the one the example from Under Armour. But if someone, came to your website from an organic source and then browsed around and went to a different page, or if someone's coming from social media and from email, you can actually show them much bigger banners, etc. So this is just an example of how you can use one of these banners. You can show them an interstitial depending on where they come from. And then the one important thing here is to actually maintain the context. So if someone's coming from a specific page, actually take them to the exact same page inside your app. And you can use, if you use branch for your banners, the deep link behind the banner actually keeps the context. One really important thing here, we did an analysis of people using these banners, and we try to understand, are all banners created equally? And while there is some difference between the banners, we found that actually that difference doesn't actually matter that much. What matters is actually this idea that if you personalize and you show people different things, depending on where they come from, where they are way more likely to click and convert. So this shows, like the 0.8 conversion rate is for people who just use one banner on all their pages. They don't do any personalization. The 2.1 is maybe people use 2 or 3 versions. Maybe they use a few interstitials and then have just a small banner on everything else. And then people who do a lot of personalization and actually like go and change the messaging depending on the page you're in, the button, the action button, the language depending on the country you're in, etc. Those people actually were able to take the conversion from view to click for their banners to 5.4% from 0.8%. So that's more than 5x the conversion by actually personalizing these banners to drive people into the app from your website. The other interesting thing I want to talk about specifically, when it comes to organic, we've talked a lot about web, optimizing web, but I think there are 2 other places that I think sometimes are important to think about. And I think QR codes is a really interesting organic strategy that is doing, it's really made a comeback during COVID. And this is something that we've had at Branch for a long time, but we only saw it used in Asia before COVID. With COVID, this became really big. So there's 2 ways to use these QR codes. One is actually this idea of using the QR codes from your desktop. So one thing that we saw, we looked at how the COVID has impacted different platforms. And we saw that desktop web has also seen a pretty big spike. And you also can see that, desktop web has a lot more usage during the week with dips into the weekend. And then mobile web and app has also increased. So both desktop, web, and obviously all digital has increased, but desktop does have higher usage or during the weekdays and lower usage over the weekend. So one thing that we've seen companies do is actually use QR codes to get on the desktop to get people to download the app and activate the app on their account. So this is an example of how TripActions does it. This is another example for Bill.com, where you can actually text yourself the app instead of using a QR code to convert someone from desktop into mobile web. The Optus is another example here that create a custom desktop landing page with the text me the app feature, again, to convert people from desktop into mobile web. The other examples that we've seen with QR codes is people trying to convert from the offline world into the app. Pete's Coffee is a really interesting one. They added QR codes on all their coffee cups, and this is how the coffee cup QR code looks. And then they've also added them on all their stores. And if you scan the QR code, you are taken to that store and you can order ahead and then just go and pick up versus going inside the store and talking to someone. So to just like minimize contact and potential exposure. This is another one from a Singapore company, SingLife, who's using QR code in ads. And this way, they can obviously get conversion to a specific promotion, but they can also track those ads and which specific ads actually are doing better than others and which locations work best. And then we've also seen a few, and this is an example from Thailand, but we've had quite a few in US as well, where people are showing QR codes during a TV commercial. So that way they can actually track, get the app downloads, but also track what works and what doesn't through those QR codes. So that's it. I saw some people raising hands, and if we have any questions, please add them in the Q&A or into the chat. We can still be here for another few minutes. See. Oh. Well, if there are no questions for today, that we have on here, we have a few. Okay. What do you suggest to manage growth for an investment app? I think, Ethan, you've had some experiences working with some investment apps. Do you have any suggestions on this one?
Yeah, so I would say that whenever you're thinking about an app, it's useful to think about the LTV. And if the LTV is really high, then obviously you can do things like paid and referrals and incentivized referrals. So my initial thinking is that any investment app is going to have an extremely high LTV. And so therefore paid and incentivized referrals, like, get free $10 or your friend gets $10 or you get some free other thing. Those are probably going to be very interesting to explore. The other thing, I would probably start there, and then over time I would get more into things like content marketing, because a lot of the investment content online is still not that great. I think there's a lot of room for opportunity. So I'd probably start with paid channels and try to get break even with your LTV, and then start branching into organic to amplify that after you have some traction.
And I've seen, I think, a lot of the newer banks use both SEO. So if you're looking for like something like, both the SEO and referrals. So I know someone like Robinhood worked a lot on their SEO strategy. So if you're looking for buying a specific stock, there's actually an article around that. So there's SEO could work well. And then like referrals have worked well in financials for investment companies like Robinhood, the referral. I think they used us in the early days for the referral, and it's been one of their best channels. But also in a lot of the banks and others have referrals have worked really well. Let's take Oscar's question. Best way to understand keyword traffic and how to prioritize. This is a really interesting one. I think you can use a lot of tools out there like SEMrush, Moz to get keyword traffic. And I think figuring out what those keywords are, with Branch, we actually look at 3 different areas. One is the keywords that we rank on right now. We want to rank better. The other one is competitor keywords. And the third one is what we call the brainstorm keywords. So basically the keywords that we think we should rank on, and then we get volume, potential to rank. These companies actually have some really good numbers. And then we came up with our own scoring depending on relevance to the Branch brand, volume of traffic, potential of us to actually score and get on the first page for those keywords. And I can share in one of the future webinars, maybe in the paid one, I'll share how we created that and how we decide which keywords to focus on when it comes to both paid and organic. Based on your experience, what are the top 3 growth activities for a food app? Well, Ethan, you are the VP of growth for Yumly, so.
Yes, I can help with that. So a few things. SEO for sure is one. Community is another. So the food community is really strong. There's tens of thousands of food bloggers, and they're all very supportive of each other. And so building relationships with influencers and community members within the food community is great. There's also things like nutritionists and restaurants and all kinds of different subcultures within food. So tapping into that community, I think, is really effective. The second is, as I mentioned, content marketing. So producing really great recipe content, producing really great articles. Masterclass has had good success ranking for a lot of different food terms. So SEO is huge it's probably one of the largest categories within SEO. The click-through rate is really high. So I would do that. And then last is social. So how do you have content on your site that then gets shared back to social? And I think that this is even more important than having your owned social channel. Like if I'm a food blogger, yes, I can make my own social channel, but getting my users to share my content with their friends is a way to really amplify. So again, building a community, sharing, and then SEO and content marketing.
Great, thank you. Then we'll take another one from the chat. Do you have any data on when it's best to take prospects from web to app before or after a registration conversion event? We don't have data on this because it's completely different depending on the app. I will say the best practice here, first of all, I think it's important to test both and see what your conversion rate is if you take them before or after, and what your drop-off is at every step. I would say one thing that's really important is that you don't push them to the app too early. So, I think sometimes people, when someone comes to a website and maybe they go on one page and they see a big interstitial, join the app. I think, I like to think about the experience of interacting with the users like dating. And in some ways, getting them to get the app is like closing the deal or getting someone to be in a steady relationship with you. And if we ask them too early, they get freaked out and then they they get annoyed. So in many cases, it's actually important once they've shown some interest. So if they've looked let's say at 20 pages, or if they've just purchased something, or if they're just about to purchase something. And then it's also very important that you give them an incentive. Taking them to the app is more work than just getting them to register, right? They have to go and download, and then you ask them to register. So it's important to give them little things. So maybe they do half of the registration on the website and they feel bought in, and then you take them to the website to finish it, but you give them something for it, right? So I remember we were working in the early days with a shopping company, and they had this thing where if you came from SEO, they had a little banner that said, buy this in the app and you get 15% off. And they added a 50% coupon to the link behind that. So there was this incentive for people. And this was an app. I think they ended up being bought by Walmart. So they were definitely focusing on low prices. And they knew that 50% actually meant a lot to their users. So they saw tripling their like organic app downloads just from by adding that 50% to the banner. So that made a huge difference. So understanding that like, you know, with them having the app is really important and like will build your relationship. But like if you ask too early and if you don't give them an incentive, you might also turn them off. Okay, how long does it take for SEO for UGC to work and rank? Pinterest type list, top 10 Joe Rogan episodes, etc. I think maybe Ethan or Kevin, do you guys have any thoughts on this? I actually don't know the answer on this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump on this one, Ethan, if you're, and maybe you can add some to it. Perfect. So generally, with any question how long it takes to rank, there's the first reaction is always it depends, which SEOs love to say. But then to give you an actual answer, it will depend on a couple of different factors. The biggest factor that this depends on is how competitive the query or keyword actually is, right? So there's another relationship between the length of a keyword and the competitiveness. In many cases, the longer the keyword, meaning the more words it contains, the less competitive it is. The exceptions apply, right? But that's a relationship that we can clearly draw. So for you know, to figure out how long it takes, you can use tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, Moz, and a couple of others to understand the competitiveness. And when that is something that's created by users, meaning if those lists, for example, are user generated, then I wouldn't necessarily like worry too much. I would more engage users to just create content and then over time see what Google naturally tries to rank. And you can see something like that in the Google Search Console. And then you can see what how many impressions single queries get. And that will help you to then better understand how Google tries to rank your site, what to optimize for, what content quickly gains traction. But if I got your problem right and your context, then I wouldn't worry too much in the beginning how long something like that takes to rank. I would much more worry about factors like engagement with the content that users create content on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. How would you go about calculating LTV? I can take this one, but if someone else wants to take it.
All you.
On me, okay. So I think, you know, as you think about, we'll talk about this actually in the last session on measurement and retention. I think the best way to look at this is like figuring out, and this can be a lot easier for if you're a consumer company and people buy right away. You kind of figure out how many times on average do they buy, or if it's a subscription, what's their average like lifetime when for the subscription, and then how much they pay on average. And that can be a pretty simple calculation. When it's actually a B2B company where the cycle is a lot longer and maybe they stay with you for 2 or 3 years before they churn, I think you kind of have to figure out what your churn rate is, how much do you make per customer per average, and how long do they actually basically stay with you on average, and you just multiply those to get your lifetime value. But it can be more complicated if you're a startup and you don't actually know how long people will stay with you. And you can usually, in those cases, you kind of look at the data that you have, what's your current churn rate, and you guess. If you're an early stage startup, if you're a big company, you probably have all those numbers and it shouldn't be that complicated to calculate. Do you have any tips for improving retention for a life improvement company such as Calm? And then also, how can we organically grow for a mental health app? So do you guys have any thoughts on mental health, improving retention and growth in general?
So my main recommendation is to try to build a habit. And I think meditation is a perfect example where meditation, exercise, eating well, where you have to establish a habit. And so I think the best way to increase retention is starting with the new user experience and activating the user to get to perform a specific action that they can then create a habit around, and then getting them and having daily reminders to do that, daily or weekly reminders. In the case of meditation, I think daily is perfect. So probably the best way is to say, what is a bite-sized amount of meditation that is realistic for a new user to do? Let's push them to do it once, and then let's push them to do it a second time, build a habit out of that. And then that is, I think, probably one of the best ways to build retention. I know that Headspace has like a first 10 days. I think Calm has something similarly, but building habits, I think, is probably one of the most effective ways.
This one is interesting. If you have a campaign in a large city and you want to feature QR codes, do you have several different messages? How do you set up those unique QR codes? So actually, if you use branch, every branch link has a different QR code, and you can actually go and change. So you could create, for every campaign, you can create a different link with a different QR code, and you can actually change those links. So let's say a QR code goes to one link for a while, and then you want to change where that link goes to after like 2 months, but you already printed the QR code. You can go and change that, and you can have like hundreds of them and like test and see how each of them is working. I would suggest giving that a try. Okay, Ethan wants to answer. Do you have any 2020 tips for web pages? Go for it.
Yeah, the main thing for 2020 tips, I'm missing the question, but it's about highlighting the expertise of the author. So for Your Money or Your Life content, which is health, legal, and finance, the author needs to be credible. So if you can specify the author, specify their credentials. NerdWallet, I know, will give stuff like they have a particular degree or certification or things like that they've written for this particular publication. But talking about the fact that the author is an expert, so that could be at the top, the bottom, a separate author page. Those are one way. And then number two is to just have actual established influencers and celebrities in the space, if you can do that, and get them to write content.
Well, with that, I know we're over time. Thank you so much, Kevin and Ethan, for joining us today. And thank you everyone for being such an engaged audience. And hopefully we'll see you at the next installment of this on Thursday. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.